Season 4 did kind of shake up the meta a little bit at the start of the season, throughout the season, and then now at the end of the season as well. So I thought I would go ahead and make an end of season tier list, since there's probably aren't going to be any more nerfs or buffs until the start of season 5. So thought I might as well just go ahead and do this. I think I'm going to kind of try and speed run this a little bit so that this doesn't take too long. And I think we're just going to go in order here. The Deagles are inaccurate, but they are a good weapon if you get over all of the dispersion that they have on them. And if you can aim your shots really well, then they are going to be a solid weapon, but they do require good accuracy. They do have dispersion on them, so they are an innately inaccurate weapon. But if you can aim, they are good. So it's not like they're always good for any player. It's not like they're good if they're used correctly, because that dispersion is still going to be there. But if you get over the inaccuracy, if you play around that, they are still going to be good weapons. The way I've done this is like, this isn't necessarily S, this isn't necessarily A, this isn't necessarily B. It's just kind of like how the weapon itself functions. So if it's always good, it means you don't have to pair anything else on your loadout to make it worthwhile. Good if used correctly would be something like the sledgehammer. If you pair it with the right stuff, like if you pair the sledgehammer with, for example, winch claws and like barricades, and this can be a very good weapon. But like, I'm not putting the sledgehammer in B tier, but it is kind of going where the B tier would normally be, if that makes sense, just because it can do very well if you do use it correctly. So that's kind of my thought process behind how I'm arranging everything here. Next is going to be the 9-3R. It's a bad weapon, and it does not separate itself enough from the other multitude of weapons that the light has that function in the same range, so it's just a bad weapon, and it needs to be buffed, and it needs to kind of stand out on its own. Just do the dual blades real quick as well. The riot shields are just better, so it's also a bad weapon. The 9-3R, you know, M11 V9S, SH1900, sword, dagger, bow, all of these would function at a similar range, so it's just overshadowed by literally everything else. And the dual blades are overshadowed by the riot shield. Both of these need to get buffed. AKM is always good. I like it is a little bit inaccurate, because it's got lots of visual recoil on it, so on some of the shots the dot is not lined up properly with the center of your screen, so it is an innately inaccurate weapon, but there's no actual dispersion on it or anything, and it is still hit scan, so it's not properly inaccurate, if that makes sense. But it's always a good weapon. You don't really have to pair anything else on your loadout to make this worthwhile. It's always just going to be a solid pick, and it's not very difficult to use, not too punishing or anything like that, so I think that is going to go in the highest tier I have right now. I should also say there's nothing like there's no like S like a must pick or anything above this, because right now I just don't think there's any weapons like that in the game. So yeah, then we have the Seal 40. And this is not such a good weapon. It's very hard to aim correctly, and even if you do aim correctly, like, the time to kill is just not that fast. It's going to be faster on a different weapon. It's not very forgiving, because you have to hit like the majority of your shots to be able to even kill a heavy at all. And I think you only have like one spare bullet left over or something like that. So it's really just not the best thing ever, and some buffs to it would be much appreciated. Embark at the start of the season buffed it kind of the wrong way. Then it was too strong, and then it got nerfed again. So if it was just like buffed the right way, I think that would be good. But right now it's back in a state where like you don't really use this if you're playing World Tour or Ranked, which is what this tier list is for. I don't really care about, you know, quick play or anything here. This is going to be for the more competitive game modes, of course. Then we have the FMAS. This is also always good. Just pretty similar to the AKM. Less visual recoil though, so it's more accurate. You can use it at the longer ranges, and the hip fire is pretty solid on this thing as well. And it's a burst weapon, so there's no kind of like, there's like, with semi-auto weapons, sometimes it can be difficult to get that super high fire rate while maintaining, you know, where you're actually shooting. But with the burst weapon, I don't think it's that difficult to do, so I think that this is always just going to be a good pick. The FCAR I'm actually going to put into good if used correctly, because this does have a recoil pattern on it. It doesn't have any visual recoil, so, you know, that's good, but the recoil pattern is a little bit punishing. The mag size is a little bit punishing, and it is also super similar to the AKM and the FMAS, so like these two are much more forgiving and just easier to use for everyone while still being good at the higher up levels. The FCAR can be good at the higher up levels, but it's not as easy to use for, you know, like decent players or average players or anything like that. A little bit more punishing, so that's why it's going to go into the good if used correctly category. Then I'm going to go with the flamethrower. And this is going to go into good if used correctly. I think I'm going to put this last in good if used correctly because it's just not that good right now. Like, if you're a sledgehammer person, you can very easily take care of a flamethrower person, but it does have its benefits. You know, if people are all grouped up together, then it can be decent and it can perform okay, but it's just not going to be the best thing ever. So it's probably going to end up like last in this tier, but it is like a very okay, solid, decent pick. If you don't really want to have to deal with visual recoil and recoil patterns or any of that nonsense, you just, you know, you point and shoot and it shoots. It did get a pointless nerf. It did not need to be nerfed this season whatsoever, and it got nerfed for no reason. So, you know, classic Embark right there, but right now it's still okay. It could do with a buff, so I could put it here, but that feels like a little bit harsh. So I think I'm going to leave it here, but I'm just going to put it last in the tier to emphasize that it probably could do with a buff or something similar. The dagger is going to go, I'm going to put it in this tier because, like, even though it's not really inaccurate, it's real hard to, well, I'll put this here, I guess. The dagger is very, very, very difficult to be effective, and it's also on the light class, which makes it even worse. But, you know, you can get some nice plays with it. I'm sure if you're good, actually, you know what? It's not so good. The dagger is not so good because A, it's on the light class, which is currently the worst class in the game and has been for a long time, and B, if you're against a half-decent player, they're just going to kill you without turning their back to you, and that's not very difficult to do. So, you know, you could make some nice plays with the dagger in World Tour or Quick Play or something like that if your opponents, you know, aren't matching in your same range, but if you're like a Platinum player, you're going to have a rough time backstabbing someone because they're just going to hear you, they're going to shoot you, they're going to call out to their teammates where you are. Even if you get a kill with the dagger, you know, the team of three mediums are just going to defib each other. So, like, there's not really so much point. You might get a kill, but you're just going to die straight afterwards. And you have to dedicate a whole lot of your loadout to make this thing even somewhat viable. So, I don't think it needs buffs. I'm not saying that. I just think it's not such a good pick, which is why this says not so good / needs buffs. Then, going to go into the Riot Shield, which can be good if you use it correctly. Like, if you're a really good Riot Shield player and you really know what you're doing, then the Riot Shield can be good. You know, if a teammate goes for a cash out steal, you can block them off. And if you always keep someone to your left, it can be decent. And it's pretty annoying to play against as well. The hitboxes need to be fixed on it, and the hitboxes don't work properly. But it is a solid weapon, so that's just going to go into there. M11 is good. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it first in good if used correctly, because you can't really be trying to snipe people with it. You have to get up in there, you have to get close to people and all of that kind of stuff. But if you manage to do that, if you've got decent aim, and if you can get up close to people, then it is going to be a decent weapon. It's not like super amazing or anything, and it does require a little bit more skill to use than something like the AKM and the FAMAS, just because it's on the light and because you don't have much utility to help you out. Well, you do, but, you know, you're on light and it's very punishing. So the M11's good, but it takes a lot of work to make it worthwhile, whereas you could just have a much easier time using AKM or the FAMAS or even the FCAR, honestly. But the FCAR is more punishing, so I think I actually am going to put it behind the M11. Well, you know what? It's not as punishing because the M11 is on light, but lights, no, it is. Okay, I'm going to put it there. Anyway, moving on. Swords is good if used correctly. Not so fantastic anymore after the nerf. It absolutely did not need to be nerfed whatsoever. Again, it's on the light. If you're playing in, like, the plat ranges and you've got somewhat decent aim, you're just going to be able to kill the light, and the light's just going to die, and they're going to be dead, and then that's it. That's the end of the fight. So it's good if used correctly, but, you know, not super amazing or anything like that. The KS-23 is inaccurate. It's got a little bit of dispersion on it, but this thing is an absolute powerhouse. I'm not going to put it here because, well, actually, no, I'm just going to put it here. KS-23 is probably the most slept on weapon in the game currently. I much prefer it to the M60 or the Lewis gun or anything like that. Winch Claw plus this thing, or Chardon Slam plus this thing with, like, the RPG Dome and Barricade is super solid. This is basically a hit scan weapon if you're using it at the ranges that it's meant to be used at, and it's a shotgun, so you're supposed to be using it at the close ranges. And the projectile speed is so fast that this is pretty much just a hit scan weapon. It's not actually, but it pretty much just is. You just aim at where the person actually is, and you're going to hit your shots. And if they're a little bit further away, it's still not very difficult to hit them. You do have to, like, ADS every time you shoot just to, like, minimize the dispersion. But if you do that then most of the time, if your reticle is where the person is, you're going to hit the shot. So I think if you're using this properly and like you know how to use it and you know how to play heavy, this is actually going to be a very, very, very good pick. And you know what? I'm going to bop up the sledgehammer there as well, because that goes the same way with the sledgehammer. And I think I mentioned that before. So SA1216 is also very solid pick if you use it correctly. If you're playing this with like the Winch Claw, you can just absolutely delete mediums from the game super quickly, especially if they're you know, they don't really know how to get away from a Winch Claw. So fast, same goes for light actually, and even heavies, you can deal a lot of damage to a heavy super quickly with this thing. So if you know how to use the Winch Claw, if you can hit your shots with it, and you know how to use this SA1216 with all its kind of gimmicks that it has on it, this can be a very good weapon. Then you have the bow. Where do I want to put the bow? I wonder. Like, it can be good if you use it correctly, but I mean, yeah. Maybe I'll make another tier. Hold on. Let's add a row below, and this row is going to say good, but punishing. Okay, so bow is good but punishing. The sword is good but punishing. The riot shield is probably good but punishing. And then what else am I gonna put in here? I'm not gonna put the flamethrower in there. Probably the M11 as well. This might just be like all of the light weapons plus the riot shield, honestly. Yeah, I'll put the dagger in there as well. Okay, cool. So I'm happy with that. The bow is good but punishing because, you know, if you miss your shots, you're going to be very out in the open, and whenever your bow is drawn, I'm pretty sure you can't sprint as well, which is kind of like a pretty major drawback on it as well. If you miss a shot, obviously you have to like whip out another arrow to shoot again. It is good if you hit headshots and all of that, but it is pretty punishing as well. If you miss a few shots and someone figures out where you are, then probably not going to be the best situation ever for you, and you do have to have like super good aim to make it even somewhat viable as well, so you have to keep that in mind. Then we have the spear, which I don't think is that good, but yeah, I'm gonna put this into good but punishing as well, actually, because the spear is like a worse version of the sledgehammer, with a little bit more range, which doesn't make up for it not being as good as the sledgehammer. The right click is entirely pointless on it. Actually, you know what, I'm gonna say needs buff because I want the right click to be reworked, because the right click is absolutely awful and the sledgehammer is just quite simply a better weapon. So I think the spear is very overshadowed. I think the sledgehammer overshadows the spear quite a lot, and I think the spear needs a buff, so that's gonna go there. V9S needs to be changed a little bit because the M11 and the XP54 are just better, or even the SH1900, and they all function at similar ranges. So I think the V9S is good. I think you can, you know, get shots off with it, but it's just very similar to like all of the other weapons on the lights lit out, that there's like really just not so much point in using it instead of the M11. Like the V9S feels cool to use, but the M11 is just the better weapon, so the V9S needs something done to it to separate it from the other weapons. The XP54 is still good, but obviously you do have to hit your shots. If you like unload a full mag into someone and you don't really hit them much, again, you're playing as light, you're playing as the squishiest class in the game. If you die, then someone has to come res you, and that's not a good thing. If you miss your shots and you don't get that kill that you need to get, then you die, then you know, it's not good for you, and you're not going to be in a very good position if you miss your shots. So that's why it's punishing. Pretty much all of the light weapons, I'm probably just going to put in the punishing thing, because light doesn't have any super awesome, amazing weapons while, you know, not being punishing. That's just not how the light works. So then we have I'll go with the model. So the model recently got nerfed, and I will say it's good if used correctly. I think the model is still going to be a good weapon if you use it correctly, but it's no longer always going to be good in like every single fight. So I think that's just gonna like downgrade a tier or two. To use this correctly, you have to like shoot, get to cover, shoot, get to cover, shoot, get to cover while you're like pumping the weapon or whatever. So you do have to use it correctly, and you have to use it in the right ranges as well. And you can't be standing out in the open 1v1ing someone that has an AKM, because you're going to lose that, because the AKM has a faster time to kill than the model 1887, even if they're not hitting headshots. So it's you also have to be able to melee someone while you're shooting at them as well, while staying in cover, and all of that is a little bit difficult to do, but it is good if you use it correctly. Then we have the LH1, which I'll put good but punishing again, because you have to have good aim to make this thing worthwhile. But if you have that good aim, like if you're a cheater that just has aimbot, then the LH1 is going to be a very good pick. It does lots of damage pretty quickly, but it is a punishing weapon, lots of visual recoil on it, lots of recoil shake and recoil kick, and you just have to be able to aim, which is difficult to do in this game. And also, if you like beam someone and you miss a few shots at the start, they're going to know where you are, and then they're probably going to be able to deal a lot of damage to you relatively quickly, because light, again, is the squishy class in the game. But I am putting it like first here, because I think it's probably one of the better weapons. Actually, with that in mind, I'll do something like that. I think looks a little bit better. Okay. I don't want to do those right now. This is the M26 Matter. And this is actually a good weapon. You know, I'm going to put the M26 and the M11 in here. So the M26 Matter and the M11 are both good weapons if you use them correctly. Like, if you know how to use light, then these weapons can perform very well. And they don't require, like, super decent aim or anything, unlike the LH1 and the XP54. Both of these can, you know, pretty much destroy someone up close and personal if you know how to play light. And if you're going up against someone that, for some reason, doesn't know how to play against light, then you can have a decent time with both of those things. Then you have the revolver, which needs a buff. What needs to happen to the revolver is either completely remove the visual recoil entirely, because it doesn't make sense to be on the gun. And what happens right now is, like, the maximum fire rate, like, you don't have very much time after you shoot to, how do I explain this? When you shoot with the revolver, you get a whole lot of visual recoil, and by the time you can next shoot, the visual recoil hasn't exactly settled yet. So if you just keep the maximum fire rate as much as you possibly can, like, you are barely able to see where your opponent is before you can shoot your next shot, if that makes sense. So either completely remove the visual recoil on this thing, or dial it back a whole ton so that you can actually, like, realistically maintain a high fire rate while landing shots, which right now is not possible because you can't see where you're aiming because of the visual recoil. Or just give it like a mag size buff or a damage drop off buff or something like that, because right now it does just need something. It needs to have something done to it to be worthwhile, because right now, like, AKM or FAMAS are just better. The FAMAS is actually just, like, a much better version of the revolver right now, so it does need a little buff to it. It is good, but it needs a buff. Then we have the pike, which is not fantastic right now, I think. It got a few too many nerfs, rather, and now it's not fantastic, so maybe I'll put it in... where do I want to put this? I wonder. I think I'll put it in good if used correctly. Like, if you've got two teammates and you're all coming, and two of them are playing close to the objective, and, you know, the wall's blown up so you can see through into the area, and you're standing a little bit far away and you're trying to snipe people with the pike, then sure, it can be good. You just have to use, like, a whole lot of communications and, like, talking to each other, and you probably have to dedicate a good bit of your kit to using this as well. But if you can do all of that, then I'm sure it can be good. It's just like the FAMAS is just much better. But that doesn't mean the pike is bad. It just means the FAMAS is a much better pick and a much less punishing pick and all of that kind of stuff. So this was nerfed a little bit too much recently. I don't think it's very good anymore. It's, like, nowhere near as good as it used to be, but it can still be okay if you use it right. So SH1900 is a good weapon. This is a good weapon, so that's going to go ahead of the M26 Matter, I think. You know, do 2 shots, get out of there, don't get hit, can delete teams, but obviously it's light, so still punishing, but I don't think it's, like, punishing enough to be in the punishing tier. Well... yeah, no, this is good but punishing. This is, like, the essence of the weapon. It's a good but punishing weapon. Like, M11 and M26 Matter are less punishing because much higher mag sizes and stuff. So yeah, if you're good with the SH1900, you can destroy people, and if you're not, then you probably can't, and so it is therefore a good but punishing weapon. Then you have the throwing knives, which are good but punishing again. Because it's very easy to miss shots with a weapon that isn't hit scan and has a relatively slow projectile speed. So that's going to go, yeah, right there, I think is okay. These can absolutely destroy enemies, but again, you're the light class, you're playing as the class that sucks, and also it's a tough weapon to use because it's not hit scan, the projectile speed is quite slow, they have arc to them, so it's just quite difficult to make this thing super duper mecha worthwhile, just because it's on light mainly, and it's like not as good as something like the SH1900 where you hit 2 shots, someone's dead. You have to hit like a few shots before someone's dead. You do have the perk of like it being silence and stuff, but it's tough to make the most out of this thing. Then you have the sniper, which is also good but punishing, I think. No, I'm gonna put the sniper in good if used correctly. Like, it is a punishing weapon, but I think it's like so good that you can kind of get over the punishing aspect. Like the M11 and like the M26 matter, it can do very well at the closer ranges if you can quickscope or like crouch and just hip fire, and then if you know how to pair your melees together as well, this is a solid weapon, especially if you're, you know, coming with your team and stuff. But it is on light. That's the issue with this tier list. It's like all of the weapons on light are just so much worse than any of the other weapons in the game because they're on the class that sucks the most. So that's like my dilemma here. I think the sniper is good if you use it correctly. I think if you can hit your shots, it can be very good. And if you can quickscope and hip fire at the closer ranges, this can be very good. So I'm going to put it first in the good but punishing tier, just in front. I'm going to put it behind the SH1900 because the SH1900 is pretty easy to use compared to the sniper. So there that goes. MGL32. It's not a fantastic weapon, it does need some buffs, and it is confirmed that it is going to get a rework of some sorts that might be coming next season, so I think it makes sense to just put it in the not so good / needs buff category, because I think it's both of those things, and it is getting reworked, so that'll probably be a buff in one form or another. Then we have the Lewis gun, which I don't like because it feels like a pea shooter, and it has lots of visual recoil, so, you know, not really a fan of those things. It is... I don't think it's always good, because I don't think you want to pair this with, like, the Winch Claw, you know? Whereas with the AKM, you can pair that with any specialization you want and have a good time. So I don't think it's always good, because I don't think you can pair it with anything, and that's what always good means. But if you use it correctly, then the Lewis gun and the M60 are both going to be decent weapons. I actually, you know what, I'm genuinely and unironically going to put these behind the KS-23 and the SA-1216, because both of these just delete enemies, and the Lewis gun, the M60, you have to have good aim for. You have to know, like, the 45... No, you have to know, like, the 42 and the 60 mag size in both of these things. You need to know the recoil pattern for all 60 of those bullets for each gun, you know? So you have to learn a pretty big recoil pattern. You gotta deal with large amounts of visual recoil, lots of recoil shake, and all of that stuff. Whereas with the KS-23 and the SA-1216, you point and shoot, and then you get kills, you know? So I think these are a little bit more complicated to use and just a little bit more inaccurate, but they are good. So I think they're still going to go ahead of... Actually, you know, I'm going to put the sledgehammer in front as well, because this absolutely destroys enemies if you can use it effectively. So I'm going to put the FCAR in front as well. And yeah, no, I'm happy with that. So always good weapons that you can pair with absolutely anything and still have a very good time. AKM and FAMAS. Weapons that are good if used correctly, so like the KS-23 with the Charge and Slam can be good, SA-1216 with Winch, Sledge with Winch, FCAR, you just have to know how to use it. Same goes with the Lewis gun and M60. Model, you have to know how to use it properly. M11 is good but punishing, and you have to be able to hit your shots, get in and get out of the fight real quick. Same with the M26. Pike, you just have to be able to hit your shots really, and the Flamethrower is not in the best state ever. I do think it could do with a buff, but if you pair it with the right stuff, if you just try and stack like full, you know, fire damage with like pyro mines and stuff like that, I think you can get a lot done with this thing. Then the good but punishing weapons, pretty much just all of the light weapons plus the riot shield, because if you mess up with the riot shield, you're just gonna die. And you have to be good with all of these light weapons to be able to make them even slightly worthwhile, because you're playing the class that sucks, right? So you have to pull your weight more so than you would have to pull your weight as a medium or as a heavy to be worthwhile and to have like a positive KD and to play the objective well and all that kind of stuff. The Deagles are inaccurate, but they are good. I'm surprised there's only one thing going into the category there. I mean, you could put the KS-23 here as well, because it also has lots of dispersion, but I don't really want to put it there because I like it a lot. I mean, the Deagles are they're good, but inaccurate. So, you know, I think it makes... I'm not trying to say that this tier is worse than this tier. Like, I know that the SH1900, for example, is much better than the Deagles if you're a good player. But I feel like... Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to explain it. But anyway, the Deagles are inaccurate, but they are good. So, like, maybe I should put this tier, like, maybe this tier should go above the good but punishing tier. Actually, so can I move that row? I don't know. Hold on. Let's just get rid of this. Let's go add row above, and this is going to say good. No, inaccurate but good. Inaccurate but good. Oh my god, I can't spell this word. Inaccurate but good. Is there's two C's? Yep. Inaccurate but good. That goes here, and then I delete this row. Delete row. Boom, done. Okay, inaccurate but good, good but punishing. The not so good such news buffs. MGL32, that's getting reworked. Revolver needs to have the visual recoil gone. V9S is overshadowed by the M11 and the SH1900 and the XP54 and the M26 Matter and the bow and the throwing knives and the LH1 and pretty much every other weapon in the light class. CL40 needs a buff, just not so good right now. The spear is a worse version of the sledgehammer. The 93R is, you know, like the V9S, but even more so because it's also overshadowed by the V9S. And then the dual blades are just a much worse version of the Riot Shield. So there you have it. There is my tier list for the end of Season 4 of the finals. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. That is going to be it for this video. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Very well.